All right, so in this lesson, we're going to learn how to evaluate functions. And so if you look at number one, you have this function, and so this is function f of x, and it's equal to 3x squared minus 7x minus 2. So I have this quadratic function right here. Now, all I want to do in this lesson is evaluate these functions. Now, in another lesson in the future, not long from now, you're going to learn how to graph these quadratic functions. See how this is a quadratic function? X squared is the largest term here, or in this case, the largest exponent is 2. So you have this quadratic function. So in another lesson, you're going to be graphing these quadratic functions. But for this lesson, you're just going to learn how to evaluate them. Now, the first one's easy. So the first one, you've had this experience before. So in this one, let's go ahead and find f of negative 4. So based on prior experience, you know that f of negative 4 means, remember, see right here, that f of negative 4, that negative 4, that's going to stand for the value of x. So f of x. So x here is negative 4. So what that means is wherever you see that variable x in your function, you're going to substitute negative 4. And so when I do that, I'm going to get 3 times x. Now remember, since x is negative, whether it's negative or not, but especially since it's negative, it's a very good idea to put that in parentheses. Otherwise, you will make an error here. So make sure when it's negative, it's being placed in parentheses, and especially if it's being raised to a power. Minus 7 times negative 4, which is x, notice the parentheses, and then minus 2. And then at this point, I'm going to simplify what I have here using the order of operations. So I know that I've got to use exponents before I multiply. So make sure you follow the order of operations. So negative 4 times itself is a positive 16. So I get 3 times 16. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this. Negative, remember this, even though I'm subtracting 7 times negative 4, I can think of this as adding a negative 7 times negative 4, right? So a negative 7 times a negative 4 is a positive 28, and then minus 2. And then I know that 3 times a negative 7 right here is 48. So I have 48 plus 28 minus 2. All right, now the next thing I got to do is I've got to add and subtract from left to right. So 48 plus 28 is 76. So this is 76, and then I'm going to subtract 2, which gives me 74. So what I found is that f of negative 4, so the function value, so this function, when x is negative 4, is 74. Now remember what else that means from previous lesson. You learned that in terms of a point, when x is negative 4, your y value is 74. So remember, f of x means the same thing as the y value. All right, so that you knew from previous experience. All right, so I also want you to remember is that, see how I substituted a real number into the variable, and you ended up with a real number, right? So notice no variable was part of the answer, was part of your function value. And that's because I substituted a real number. But when we look at B, I want to find f of negative x. See, that's not a real number. That is a variable expression. So let's see what happens when I substitute that. So again, wherever we see the variable x, let me go ahead and write this here. So f of x is equal to 3x squared minus 7x minus 2. So wherever I see that variable x, I'm going to substitute negative x. Okay, that's what that means. Now, the idea of substituting or finding f of negative x is going to be important when we talk about finding or determining whether a function is an odd function. I use the word odd. So that's going to be important when we talk about odd functions. So I use the word odd, O-D-D, odd functions. So when we talk about odd functions pretty soon, you're going to come back to this idea of f of negative x. All right? Okay. So to find f of negative x, wherever we see the variable x, I'm going to substitute negative x. So I get 3 times negative x squared minus 7 times negative x minus 2. And so a negative x squared, so let's think about what that means. So I'm going to go off to the side, so I'll have it written down. So negative x squared, remember, means negative x times negative x. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive. And so x times x is x squared. So negative x squared is just x squared. So this right here becomes 3x squared. And then right here, I know that a negative times a negative is a positive, right? And so a negative 7 times a negative 7x, a negative 7 times a negative x is a positive 7x, and then minus 2. And you're done. So f of negative x is this right here, 3x squared plus 7x minus 2. Now, you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, this particular finding f of negative x is important when we talk about odd functions. So when we get into odd functions, you're going to see how important finding f of negative x is. All right, so that one wasn't that bad. So it's just a matter of you, wherever you see the variable x in your function, you substitute what's inside that parentheses. All right, let's look at letter C. So suppose in letter C, I want to find f of 2x minus 1. All right, so again, let me go ahead and write out the function right here. So f of x is 3x squared minus 7x minus 2. So wherever I see that variable x in my function, notice I'm circling it. Sometimes it helps to circle this. I'm going to substitute what's inside that parenthesis. So I want to find what f of 2x minus 1 is. So wherever I see the variable x, I'm going to substitute 2x minus 1. And so therefore I get 3 times in parentheses, I'm going to substitute 2x minus 1, but that has to be squared. See that? 3, and then the quantity squared, minus 7 times x, which is going to be substituted 2x minus 1, and then minus 2. All right. And so now we got to simplify all this. So I've got to go off to the side, and I got to do some other work. But you got to remember that just like we talked about here, you have to do exponents first before you multiply. So be careful. A lot of students want to distribute the 3 first. You cannot do that. Don't distribute the 3, otherwise all of this is going to be incorrect. Remember the order of operations. The order of operations says I have to do exponents before I multiply. So we have to go to the side, and let me see if I have enough room. I think I'll have enough room here. So I'm going to go off to the side, and I'm going to figure out what 2x minus 1 squared is. Well, you had experience squaring a binomial. So remember, that means 2x minus 1 times itself, right? And so now I can use a FOIL method because I'm multiplying 2 binomials together. And so when I do that, I get 2x times 2x is 4x squared. The outer, remember FOIL, I'm using FOIL, FOIL. The outer, 2x times a negative 1 is a negative 2x. The inner is also negative 2x. So whenever you square a binomial, see these two binomials are exactly the same expression. The outer and the inner better be the same. And so notice in the inner, a negative 1 times 2x is a negative 2x. And then the last, a negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. Combining like terms, I get 4x, that should be x squared right here. 4x squared. A negative 2x and a negative 2x is a negative 4x, and then plus 1. So 2x minus 1 squared is this trinomial, this quadratic trinomial. All right, so notice though, all this right here represents is this right here. All right, so I'm going to substitute this expression here with this quadratic trinomial. But remember, all that's being multiplied by 3, so you must put that in parentheses. So 3 times this right here. So 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite everything else for right now. I'm just rewriting everything else over. So the first thing I did was I squared this binomial. So a little bit of work you got to do. Now try not to make any errors here. Well, don't make any errors. I shouldn't say try. Do not make any errors, because any error you make here is going to affect your final answer. All right, and so now we're going to go ahead and distribute. Now I can distribute. All right, so now I can distribute. So remember, you can use the distributive property whenever that exponent right here is 1. See how this was a 2? So you had to square first before you multiply. But since this exponent right here is now 1, see 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 raised to the first power, 2x minus 1 raised to the first power, I can now use the distributive property. All right, so 3 times 4x squared is 12x squared. 3 times a negative 4x is a negative 12x. 3 times a positive 1 is a positive 3. A negative 7 times 2x is a negative 14x. A negative 7 times a negative 1 is a positive 7, and then minus 2. And now let's go ahead and combine like terms. When I combine like terms, I get 12x squared. A negative 12x and a negative 14x is a negative 26x. And then positive 3 and a positive 7 is 10. And then 10 and a negative 2 is a positive 8. So therefore, f of 2x minus 1 is equal to 12x squared minus 26x plus 8. All right, and so that's the answer for that one. So a little bit more work because you are squaring a binomial. All right, so that's a little bit of work you have to do. You got to go off to the side and figure out what that binomial squared is. All right, but notice that you see in number 1 where I substituted a real number, I ended up with a real number. Whenever you substitute a variable expression, you're going to end up with a variable expression in both cases. See that? I substitute 2x minus 1. I ended up with an answer that was represented as a variable expression. All right, so that was number 1. Okay, let's look at number 2. All right, number 2, let's suppose this is my function, and my function is g of x is equal to negative 3x cubed. I'm sorry, negative 2. Let's make that a negative 2. Negative 2x cubed plus 6x squared plus 7x minus 1. And all I want to do is I want to find, in this case, g of negative x. Because that's going to be important later on. So that's going to be important. That g of negative x is going to be important when we talk about odd functions. So g of negative x. So to find g of negative x, wherever I see the variable x, I see it here. Let me go ahead and rewrite it so I don't have to mess this up. So g of x was equal to negative 2x cubed plus 6x squared plus 7x minus 1. So wherever I see that variable x, here, here, and here, I'm going to substitute negative x. So it helps some students actually circle and then draw arrows. And so wherever I see the variable x, I'm going to substitute negative x. So let's go ahead and figure out what that is. So I get negative 2, put in parentheses, negative x, and remember that's being cubed. All right, so negative 2 times negative x, I'm just substituting, cubed, plus 6 times in parentheses, negative x, squared, plus 7 times in parentheses, negative x, and then minus 1. And then let's go ahead and remember you gotta do the exponent before you multiply. So let's go ahead and figure out what negative x cubed is. I'm gonna go off to the side here and figure out what negative x cubed is. It helps to write it out. Don't do this in your head. Just write it out. Visually see this. Sometimes it helps to visually see what you're thinking about. So negative x times negative x times negative x, right? I'm running out of room, so let me go ahead and actually do it this way. So negative x cubed is negative x times negative x times negative x. All right, so negative x times a negative x, remember multiply from left to right. A negative x times negative x is a positive x squared. And then a positive x squared times a negative x, a positive times a negative is a negative. X squared times x to the first is x cubed. So negative x to the third power is a negative x cubed. So that becomes right here, that becomes, right here, excuse me. That becomes negative 2 times a negative x cubed. Okay, so negative x in parentheses raised to the third power is just negative x cubed. All right, now let's do negative x to raised to the second power. So negative x squared is negative x times negative x. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive. X times x is x squared. So that's just x squared. So then this becomes plus 6, and I'm going to put that in parentheses, x squared like that. Okay, because I put this in parentheses, I'll put that in parentheses. And to be honest with you, the reason I put this in parentheses, and that's important to know, is because x cubed was negative. So you had to, when you put in parentheses, you're actually making yourself know that this is multiplication right here, a negative 2 times a negative x cubed. If you didn't put parentheses, it would actually mean negative 2 minus x cubed. So the parentheses are important for this one right here. It wasn't needed here. You could have just said, let me just show you right here on another sheet of paper. You could have just said, right here where I have negative 2 times negative x cubed, you could have said just this, all right? But that one was important. Putting parentheses here was important because if you did not, it would look like this. If you put a parentheses, so some students will think of this as negative 2 minus x squared, and that's not true. I'm sorry, x cubed. It's actually negative 2 times a negative x cubed, all right? So parentheses are important sometimes. So it's important to use them whenever you need to. And over here, I have a positive 7 times a negative x is a negative 7x minus 1. Now let's go ahead and simplify. Let's get rid of these parentheses now. So I get equal. So this right here is equal to a negative 2 times well, first of all, a negative times a negative is a positive, all right? And then 2 times x cubed is 2x cubed. So you had to see that negative 2 times a negative x cubed is a positive 2x cubed. 6 times x squared without the parentheses is 6x squared minus 7x minus 1. And there's your answer. So g of negative x is 2x cubed plus 6x squared minus 7x minus 1. Okay? All right, so make sure you understand how to deal with g of negative x in these situations, because you're going to still come back, you're still going to deal with this when we get into even and odd functions, in particular odd functions. All right, let's look at number 3. So number 3, I have this problem for number 3. So number 3, we're going to look at two functions. Number 3, two functions. We have f of x is, let's say, this linear function. So 3 minus 5x. And let's say my other function called g of x is this quadratic function. So I have this linear function and I have this quadratic function. And I want to find, now remember, this is f of x, this is g of x. So that's going to be important when we get to these parts here. So in letter A, let's go ahead and find f of 2x plus 7. So remember, I want to find f of 2x plus 7, right? So that means I got to go to my function f. So here's your function f, here's your function g. So you must go to f, all right? So you got to go to your function f. So let me go ahead and write this out right here. So f of x is 3 minus 5x. So wherever I see that variable x, notice I'm circling it, I'm going to substitute 2x plus 7. So I get equals 3 minus 5 times 2x plus 7. And then all I have to do now is go ahead and get rid of the parentheses, simplify, and then write the answer. But remember, you have to multiply before you subtract. Now notice the exponent is here. The exponent here is 1, so that means I can go ahead and distribute at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute the negative 5. So I get 3. A negative 5 times 2x is a negative 10x. A negative 5 times a positive 7 is a negative 35. And then combining like terms, 3 and a negative 35 is a negative 32. So I get negative 10x minus 32. And so that's the answer for that one. So f of 2x plus 7 equals negative 10x minus 32. All right? Okay, so that was A. In B, for B, let's suppose I want to find g of x minus 3. So remember, this time I want to find g of this, right? So I got to go to my function g, not f, g. So let's go ahead and write what the function is for g of x. So g of x is negative 2x squared minus 7x. So let's go ahead and circle the variable x, and then wherever I see that variable x is being circled, I'm going to substitute x minus 3. And so let's go ahead and write that in. So remember, this is going to be your step. So remember, when you do your work, it's got to look like this. So you're going to say negative 2 times in parentheses x minus 3 squared minus 7 times in parentheses x minus 3. So everything you write has to be mathematically correct. Okay, so now we're going to simplify all this though. So I know that according to the order of operations, I've got to see how this binomial is being squared. So I've got to square this binomial first before I multiply by negative 2. So let's go off to the side. Let's go ahead and do that. I think I have enough room here. So I have x minus 3 squared. So we're going to do this just like we did this one right here. Okay, remember when we squared this 2x minus 1? All right, so that's the idea. So we're going to square this. And remember, x minus 3 squared means x minus 3 times itself. And I can use the FOIL method. So when I use the FOIL method, x times x is x squared. The outer is a negative 3x. Now remember, you're squaring a binomial and knows that these binomials are exactly the same. So since they're exactly the same expression, then the outer and the inner should be exactly the same as well. So negative 3 times x is a negative 3x. And then a negative 3 times a negative 3 is a positive 9. Combining like terms, I get x squared minus 6x plus 9. So this right here is only this. But all of those three terms here has to be multiplied by negative 2. So I got to put that in parentheses. So negative 2 times x squared minus 6x plus 9. And I'm going to go ahead and distribute here since I'm able to. So it'll be a minus 7x. A negative 7 times a negative 3 is a positive 21. Now distributing this now, distributing negative 2, I get negative 2 times x squared is a negative 2x squared. A negative 2 times a negative 6x is a positive 12x. A negative 2 times a positive 9 is a negative 18 minus 7x plus 21. Just rewriting these terms. And then finally combining like terms and we're done. So I get negative 2x squared. 12x and a negative 7x is a positive 5x. That's 21 right here. A negative 18 right here. So the constants, I can combine these constants. A negative 18 and a positive 21 is a positive, what's that, 3? And so there's your answer. So g of x minus 3 is a negative 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. All right. So a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of work, but there's a lot of algebra that's involved here. So there's quite a bit of prerequisite skills from previous lessons, previous courses that you have to have learned in order to successfully go through this process. All right, so that was B. So let's look at C. So I'm going to have to go to another page to do C. So let's say that C was this. So in C, I want to find f of negative x. So there's that negative x again. So let me go ahead and write out what f of x is. Remember, f of x was this. So f of x was, or is, 3 minus 5x. So that's that linear function. So in place of x, I only see x listed once. So in place of this x, I'm going to substitute negative x. So this becomes 3 minus 5 times negative x. And then we're done because we all know that a negative 5 times a negative x is a positive 5x. So it becomes 3 plus 5x. And there's your answer. So f of negative x equals 3 plus 5x. And if you want to put the variable term first, you can. So you could say f of negative x is equal to 5x plus 3. Does not matter. Okay? At this point, I should say this as well. So when writing the final answer, notice in all of these, I'll put the polynomial expression in descending order. So x squared, x and your constant. X to the first and your constant. Okay? So notice in every problem, I'll put this in descending order. Descending order. And obviously this is a constant right here. All right, so descending order. So make sure you put these in descending order. Now for this one, I would have just left it like this, but if we're using the idea of descending order, then I would say, if the direction says make sure you write in descending order, then make sure you use this one. All right, and then D, let's suppose you want to find g of negative x. So there's that negative x again, right? So that's how important this is, because remember, when we talk about odd functions, you're going to have to find the function value at negative x. So that's not going away. All right, so g of x, remember, is this. So here's g of x. So g of x is negative 2x squared minus 7x. And so I'm going to go ahead and circle the variable x in my function. And wherever I see that variable x as being circled, I'm going to substitute in its place, I'm going to substitute negative x. So I get negative 2 times, in parentheses, negative x squared minus 7 times negative x. All right, so remember, we have to simplify this term here, I have to square first before I multiply. So let's remember what negative x squared means. So negative x squared means negative x times itself. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive, and x times x is x squared. So negative x, in parentheses, being squared is just x squared. So this becomes negative 2x squared, because that here is just this. And then a negative 7 times a positive, negative 7 times a negative x is a positive 7x, and there's your answer. G of negative x is negative 2x squared plus 7x. All right, so that's D. All right, so that was number 3. Okay, let's look at number 4. And number 4, so I want you to notice that in all the previous problems, your function was written as an expression. So f of x was 3 minus 5x, g of x was negative 2x squared minus 7x, and so on. In number 4, this function is going to be a set of ordered pairs. So let's look at number 4. So number 4, you're told that your function is just the set of ordered pairs. So it's just negative 8, 2, 4, 7, negative 1, negative 6, 2, negative 4, and then negative 6, 0. All right, so that's my function. And remember, definition of function, for each x coordinate, there's got to be exactly just one y coordinate. All right, so notice when you look at this is a function. And it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has 5 ordered pairs, 5 points. And so given a set of ordered pairs rather than an equation here, you want to find that same idea. You want to find, in letter A, you want to find f of negative 1. All right, now this one's easy. Don't make it difficult. It's fairly easy to think about. Remember, f of negative 1, remember what that means. That means, what is the y value? What is the y value? What is the y value when x equals negative 1? That's what that means, right? So here's my function f. I want to find, when x is negative 1, what's my y value? Well, all you have to do is look for the point in which the x value is negative 1. So that's right here. So when x is negative 1, what's my y value? Well, my y value is negative 6. So the answer, you're going to say f of negative 1 equals negative 6. There's your answer. So when x is negative 1, my y value is negative 6. All right? So see, not difficult, right? Fairly simple to think about. You've had this idea in a previous lesson. Letter B, I want to find negative 2 times f of 4. So remember, this is multiplication. So first thing I have to do is find f of 4. So remember what f of 4 means. So f of 4 means, what is the y value? What is the y value when x equals 4? And so you look for the one, you look for the point where the x value is 4. Well, that's this one right here. So when x is 4, what's that y value? Well, that y value is 7. So I'm just going to say this. I'm going to use the point 47. So this becomes negative 2 times 7. And so negative 2 times 7, remember f of 4 is 7, right? So that's my y value. So when x is 4, my y value is 7. So negative 2 times 7 is a negative 14. And there's your answer. So negative 2 times f of 4 is equal to a negative 14. That's what that is. So fairly simple, not difficult at all. C, suppose you want to find f of 2 plus f of negative 6. All right, well, remember what this means. This means, what is that y value when x is 2? Well, when x is 2, that's right here, right? So when x is 2, what's my y value? Well, my y value is negative 4. So this becomes negative 4 plus Now we do the same thing here. What is my y value when x is negative 6? Well, when x is negative 6, when x is negative 6, when x is negative 6, that's this one, my y value is 0. So I get, so this right here is equal to negative 4 plus 0, which is just negative 4. So f of 2 plus f of negative 6 equal 0. Oh, I'm sorry, negative 4 equals negative 4. Okay? And then finally for that one, let's suppose now we want to find d. And d is f of negative 8 minus 5 times f of 2. So again, f of negative 8 means what's that y value when x is negative 8? So let's go ahead and find where negative 8 is. It's right here. Well, for x is negative 8 here. And my y value is 2. So this becomes 2 minus 5 times f of 2. So f of 2, remember f of 2 means what's the y value when x is 2? So let's go ahead and find out which one has x being 2. That's this one right here. Well, y value is negative 4. So that becomes 5 times negative 4. Notice I'm putting this in parentheses. And so this simplifies to 2. A negative 5 times a negative 4 is a positive 20. And so I get 22. So f of negative 8 minus 5 times f of positive 2 equals 22. All right. And then finally, the last problem. So let's look at number 5. And number 5, you had this in a previous lesson, one of the previous assignments that you had to deal with. But let's go ahead and look at it again. So given f of 8 is equal to negative 7, use this information to identify a point on the graph of f. All right. So you first of all, you don't know what your function is. You have no idea. You're not given, for instance, you're not given anything in terms of function notation. What is that function is in terms of an equation, right? You're not given anything like that. You're not even given a graph. But you do know enough information to answer this question. So if you were to graph this function, whatever this function may be, what would be a point on the graph? What has to be a point on the graph? Well, you have enough information here. So remember what this means. F of 8 equals negative 7 means when x is 8, my y value is negative 7. So the answer is when x is 8. So remember, in order pair, you put x first. So you must put x first. So when x is 8, my y value is negative 7. So there's your answer. So 8, negative 7. All right. So that is, I think, all I wanted to do in terms of this lesson on evaluating functions. It's not a difficult lesson. You do, remember, have to be able to have some prerequisite skills as you go through this process in this lesson.